about jokes. And one guy, I mean, most of the stuff causes me to blush. I mean, I said, I can't use this. Oh, I'll tell it. No, I can't tell this. Jeez. Oh my gosh. Anyway. Well, let's begin. Delia, we okay? Okay. Let's begin with a little prayer in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. There we go, right on time. Lord, we thank you for the many blessings you bestow on us each day of our lives. We frequently don't recognize those little blessings. So we're taking a moment now to thank you for all those blessings, just our health and our physical well-being and all of our kids and grandkids and great-grandkids, and the opportunity to gather here together and explore our minds and deepen our faith and our love in you. As we say together, glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Padre? No, I was trying to think of a good one. I like the collar one. That was new. See?
Let me see. What does it say? Cleanse with soap and water. This doesn't say anything about fleas.
I know.
All right. Enjoy.
Okay.
American church history.
Yeah.
So, we were just talking at Joseph Council. Mike Tybee is a parishioner here. And his nephew, John, is a professor at Notre Dame. Just wrote a book on universal church history from the French Revolution to the present. And it has gotten a great review. So
Oh.
it's you know, the change in the Second Vatican Council, there's a lot of controversy and mudslinging right now between those who want the Latin Mass and those that see it as a threat to the Second Vatican Council. So we'll see how that's resolved, but I'm sure what's intriguing. That's as much of American church history.
Yeah. Oh, it is. It is. Yes.
I forget the name of the author. I should look it up right now. The author is John.
Where'd my pen go? Well, that should give Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Yep. Because I've been looking for a newer one. I've got all my old goodies, which I like. What do you say, John McGreevy? Notre Dame, History of the Church. Okay. No problem.
John McGreevy, Notre Dame. American historian. Yes, Catholicism. A global history from the French Revolution to Pope Francis. It's got great reviews. John McGreevy. 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 Tip of the day.
Excellent. Excellent. On Amazon. All right. How much? That's not bad.
Mike McGreevy might be able to get you a discount.
All right. Okay. So we're concluding our overview study of the history of Catholicism, the history of Christianity, with a look at the church in the Americas, or specifically in the United States of America. And even more specifically, look at some of the high points in the foundation of the church here in Georgia. okay, which is all new to me, okay? And since many of you are longtime residents, if you know some interesting facts to add or corrections, okay, that's fine. Just add them on, all right? What we're going to do, to try to do this even in an hour and a half time is kind of silly, but what we're going to do is kind of take it in some stages and phases. And we'll start with 3 phases or stages or eras, okay? We're going to talk a little bit about what in European history books is called the Age of Exploration. What's 1492? Columbus sailed the ocean blues. Well, he had a couple of Franciscan friars on him, with him, okay? So we'll talk about the Age of Exploration, and then what is 1609 and 1620? Yep. Well, that's what it's based on, okay? What is, historically, the date of 1609 is the founding of Jamestown, okay? The colony in Jamestown, all right? Pardon? The Mayflower? No. Jamestown, Virginia. 1619 and 20 is the Mayflower up in Massachusetts Bay. They're 10 years apart, okay? Now, we know about the lost colony at Roanoke and so on and so forth, and all that mystery. But those are the foundations, and so that gives us our second era, which is the colonial era, okay? And then what's 1776? The start of the American Revolution, and then we get into the Revolutionary era. We get through those 3 phases, and if we do that tonight, I'll be happy. And then we can proceed into the 19th century and really see the growth of what one historian, and one of my favorite historians, I'll give it to you when we come to it, calls the Church of Immigrants. Because Catholicism in this country is the Church of Immigrants. If you're not proud Irish, you're probably proud Italian. And if you're not proud Italian, you're proud German. And if those 3 don't get you, then the Poles will, because the proud Polish, I mean, if you've been around Chicago and Brooklyn, boy, some of that immigrant status is really strong, okay? And that's just for people who eventually we lump into the English-speaking worlds. If you're Mexican, okay, you're very proud Mexican Catholic, very proud of your Spanish heritage. And then, if you live in New Orleans or Quebec, you're proud French, all right? So it's this, the church in the United States is like the United States itself. It's a melting pot. And as Father indicated, we didn't always get along. There were some notorious fights, nationality fights between bishops. It's kind of scandalous, really. It's kind of comical, but a little bit of scandal. Anyway, all right, so let's begin, okay? If we want to talk about the establishment of Christianity in the New World, you do start with Columbus and the early explorers, because every nation that came over, okay, in the early 1600s had explorers and also missionaries. Even the British, okay, that explorers and missionaries, because that was part of European society. Even though Europe had split in 1517 with the Reformation, and it's going to split, all right, religion was still so much a part of, we can't imagine that in our culture. That as I mentioned before, I'm going to get off on this a little bit. A group of us, 5 couples, are going to Tuscany, all right, northern central Italy, for 2.5 weeks. We rented a big villa, and we're just going to take our time. But as I'm reading all these tour books, I am reminded of how Catholic Europe once was, because every great building in every major city in Europe is the cathedral, which in some cases, I was just reading about the cathedral at Orvieto, all right? Took 30 years to design and 290 years to build. Can you believe that? Incredible. But that's because, it was built stone by stone, and everybody contributed to it, okay? And there are no machines, and so on and so forth. But it's very, very Catholic Christian culture, all right? The New World's going to be a little different, okay? Our cathedrals are football stadiums, and baseball stadiums, right? $300 billion for that last one. Jeez, criminy. Okay, rah, rah. Okay, anyway, so we go through the colonial or the exploration age, and that's important to note because if we talk about the establishment of the church, Christianity in the New World, okay, we immediately are going to be dealing with the presence of Puritans. Those are people who broke away from Anglicanism, the Church of England, and what did their name suggest? They wanted to purify worship, purify religion, and they didn't think King Henry went far enough because the Anglican Church still had sacraments, and the Anglican Church still had the Mass, and the Anglican Church still had candles, and still had incense, and still had stained glass. And Puritans wanted to get rid of all that. Because all you need is this book called the Bible. That's all you need. And you get to heaven, okay? All right. But before 1620 and all that, if we're going to be honest with our heritage, we're going to recognize that it was the Spanish and French explorers, Spanish Franciscans, and their nicknames were the Friars, okay, and the Society of Jesus from France, and the Society of SJ is Jesuits, okay? So the French Jesuits, if you look at the basketball bracket, you see all these French Jesuit names, okay? DePaul, Marquette, Xavier. It's kind of comical. And no Franciscans. That's interesting. The Franciscans didn't like basketball, I guess. I don't know. Too short. Anyway, but we have to remember, we're saying, oh boy, okay, Jamestown is founded in 1590, and the Mayflower comes over in 1620. What's the oldest European city in the New World? St. Augustine. St. Augustine. 1565. Permanent, okay? They were established there, and quite soon after the establishment, they built that magnificent fort that we all go to see and walk around, right? That's all Spanish, okay? And then if you look some more, by, I think it's by 1580, there are 21 Spanish missions in northern Florida and 2 in South Georgia, what was South Georgia today. Now, none of them survived, okay? It's really fascinating. Why did the missions do so well out in California and Texas, but not in this area? It had to do with the interaction of those missionaries and the native tribes, okay? The missionaries out in California and Texas did a better job of winning over the American Indians, okay? Here, it was always more contested and kind of negotiations. And so there weren't permanent settlements, okay? Not in the colonies. Now in Florida, there are. You will see Spanish footprints all over Florida. You will see French footprints all over southern Louisiana, okay? All right? And of course, Quebec and Montreal, okay? You'll see those footprints. And those footprints are being laid before the Puritans arrived in Massachusetts Bay. So the Spanish and the French are there, and Spanish Catholicism and French Catholicism is there, but no congregations are permanently established that we can find. I've never found one, okay? Not in those early dates, all right? The Spanish 1565, that's St. Augustine, and the church down there dates from about there. But anything into what we would call colonial America, I just can't find them, all right? And because they don't exist. They all kind of just, they're explorers and missionaries, but the missionaries didn't stay. Or if they did, if they started their little groups with maybe 10, 12 people, it died out very quickly, okay? All right, so what do we have in early times, okay? In Florida, 21 missions, okay? But most of them are going to be ousted by Indians and supported by British once the British get here, okay? In the Southwest, there are 63 missions. In San Antonio itself, there were 5 big mission churches, okay? And what's the most famous? The Alamo was a Spanish mission, okay? And there's always a lot of tension and a lot of argument over how harshly they treated the natives, if they treated them, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it wasn't as harsh as the Protestant historians like to make it out, okay? That in many cases, the Franciscans were setting up schools and training Indians. And in 2 ways, we get a bad rap, okay? That most missionaries wanted the local people to learn a little bit about the Spanish language in exchange, okay? And modern kind of, politically correct people say, that's cultural indoctrination or whatever. But they also ran schools for the kids and taught them how to read and write in Spanish, okay? And sometimes required them to kind of dress a little differently, which today, of course, is a no-no, right? But the point is, the Spanish were pretty well firmly present in those areas of California. And in California, how many missions in California? 21, okay? And believe it or not, if you travel out to Utah, and you travel from my little town of Price up Spanish Fork Canyon, way up in the mountain, there's a statue of a Franciscan, Junipero Serra, okay, the Serra Club, all right? Because he explored southern Utah and baptized some people long before the Mormons came. Interesting, okay? But these weren't big implementations, no big congregations, no real physical structures as we can tell, all right? Okay, and let's not forget that a lot of the energy, especially of the Jesuits, is heading east to India, China, and Japan, okay? And which name do you associate with all the Indian missions? India as in China and Japan. What basketball powerhouse? Francis Xavier, St. Francis Xavier, who brought Christianity, Catholicism, to India, and then on to China and Japan. And you know about the Japanese martyrs, okay, the Jesuit martyrs in Japan. They were initially welcomed, and then for about 2 generations welcomed, and then the 3rd shogai kind of found them intrusive and ousted them and killed them all off, and so on and so forth, okay? Similar in China. But in India, real strong Catholicism along that southwest belt, okay? I think I told you this before, but at one of my schools, St. Francis, okay, we had a number of Indian students. And you want to talk about conservative Catholics? Whoa, real staunch conservative Catholics. From dad all the way down to the little 2-year-old, you know? But that's their tradition in India. There are, don't quote me on this number, 131 or 141 high schools in India named Xavier, St. X. They're very exclusive prep schools. Yes?
The conservatism that you talked about in India, was that just a result of who was converting them? Or
Yes. Yes. There is a theory in religious sociology that where a religious group is a dominant majority, that majority gets a little sloppy and lazy in their practice, okay? Ireland, all right? Where you're kind of ostracized, maybe even persecuted a bit, what happens naturally? You tend to say, don't mess with my religion, okay? And that happens in India with all the competing religions, okay? You find Catholics, especially Spanish Catholics in Utah, very strong because of the Mormon presence, okay? And I found, moving here 12 years ago, that Southern Catholicism, you all, are much more loyal to your beliefs than what I left up in Ohio. Ohio is just kind of loosey-goosey. Father and I were talking about it too. He sees a lot of that in Philadelphia, which at one time was a Catholic stronghold. Okay, but they got weak, sloppy, okay, and didn't pass it on to grandchildren. That's the key, okay, passing it on.
I spent some time in Samoa in the South Pacific, and American Samoa, which is a U.S. territory, literally the west side of the island was Catholic, the east side of the island was Mormon. I mean, even to this day, it's like in the 1980s. And what happened was that the Christian and the Catholic and the Mormon missionaries came at the same time, and they agreed to split the island in half.
Wow.
Half would be Catholic, half would be Mormon, and to this day, that's the way it is right now.
Wow.
So, just how they made a deal.
At least they didn't kill each other, huh?
No, they didn't.
In the name of the Lord. Okay. All right, any question about the exploration period? Because now we're going to move into the 1600s, okay? Get Jamestown settled, get Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth Bay colony settled, get the Puritans over here, okay? And we start forming these 13 colonial possessions of England, all right, 13 original colonies, okay? And that's where things get interesting, because in all 13 colonies except 2, Catholics were forbidden to practice their faith. And in a couple, like Rhode Island, they were even forbidden to be there. No Catholics allowed, okay? Because of the Puritan reaction to the papists. They called us papists, that we would take orders from a pope and therefore couldn't be trusted, all right? Especially in this new land, this new nation, okay? And so you have, from beginning, I mean, the foundation of this country, if we're honest, there's a real strong anti-Catholic bigotry. And it runs very deep up north and really deep in the south.
So is it used for reparations?
I don't know. Go on, lab. Maybe. Maybe. Well, there were, yeah. I mean, there were priests and laymen. I don't think there were any women, Catholics, lynched in the South. Okay. I'll tell you about more as we get a little closer to the dates. I'm sorry? Right. We'll get. And probably, well, here's what's interesting, okay? Remember I said all 11 of the colonies did not allow Catholic practice or even Catholic presence. 2 did. And it's interesting what they did, okay? Philadelphia, that center there, was founded by William Penn, who was what religion? Quaker. The religion of peace. And it's not in their being to discriminate. And Quakers are just peaceful people. They're pacifists. They even, they don't serve in the military because of their religious views. And so Pennsylvania, at least eastern Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, was set up where, if not accepted, at least Catholics were tolerated, as long as they didn't get too loud, okay? And the other one was a colony that was set up by a Catholic family. Remember, the southern colonies were called proprietary colonies. Why? What's a proprietor? An owner of a business. They were owned by families. Who owned Georgia? Well, who settled Georgia? the Oberthorpe family, okay, and set up the trustees until the crown took it back, okay. What was the name of the family in Maryland? What? Calverts. What did you say? Well, yes, our first bishop is going to be John Carroll, yes. But it's the Calvert family, okay, from England, and they were lords of what little area in England? What's the largest city in Maryland? They were Lord Baltimore, okay? That's why it's named. It's named after their home base, all right? And so George Calvert, in establishing Maryland, said, we are going to establish this as anyone is allowed to practice religion here, okay? And that lasted for about, Maryland was established in 1630, and then the Protestants tried to drive the Catholics out in Maryland, and then in 1649, this will be on the exam, okay? So make sure you can get notes from Janet, because she's keeping all these exam questions, all right? In 1649, Maryland, the legislature of Maryland passed the first act of toleration. And that first act of toleration is going to become a model for a lot of Bill of Rights in states, okay? When you get a new group of people like the Thomas Jeffersons and the Ben Franklins, who are not Christian, okay, but they're certainly tolerant, because that's part of being an educated person, is to tolerate other ideas. You see how that goes? Okay? Yes?
They were non-Christian?
They were not Christian.
Franklin wasn't?
No. The deist is a deist. Okay? A deist is...
They believe in God.
They believe in God.
But they believe in Christ.
Not as a Messiah, no. Thomas Jefferson called Jesus Christ one of the greatest religious figures in the history of mankind. He didn't believe that he was the Son of God. No. Washington neither, I don't think. I would check that. Most of those founders were deists. And if they were anything, they were what I would call soft Christian. That is to say, yes, Jesus Christ, great guy. Yes, maybe the Messiah. Son of God, I don't know if I can go that far. And to be a Christian, you have to accept Christ as God. Okay, you can't just say, well, yes, Jesus was the Messiah, but not God. We fought 3 big battles in Christianity over just that. Arianism, Jesus was great, all right, and he was created by God, and he was a great Messiah, but he wasn't God. That was Arianism. I'm simplifying all this. Yeah, I was heartbroken when I found out Thomas Jefferson was not a solid Christian. Because I heard that, rather late. Late for me in college, first or second year. I remember a professor saying, oh, no. He says, read his book not persecution, on superstition. Because Thomas Jefferson has this thing about, religions being super.
Because of our definition today of a Christian.
But them...
Christian, as we defined it in the 1600s.
Oh, sure. A Christian has always... Well, you need to take a church history course, then. 325, the Nicene Creed. I believe... Oh, but here.
I'm talking about here in the
Yeah. No, the Puritans would have been very much Christ. Oh, sure. Yes. They didn't want anything Roman. Candles, incense, sacraments. What?
They didn't like the Pope.
Oh, no. Oh, my God. The Pope was the Antichrist, the devil. Okay. But the belief in Jesus Christ, very strong. And what was the instrument of his revelation? What, his word? The Bible. Read the Bible, Lem. What does John say? In the beginning, read your Bible. That's what a Protestant would say. Yeah. Good, though. Good. Yeah, but most of the founders, what we call the founders of the American Revolution, were men of the Enlightenment, that age that reject religion as divisive, intolerant, superstition, divisive, okay, and irrational. It's not rational. And we say, no, there's something higher than the human mind. Otherwise, you're just a really arrogant SOB, you know. I mean, you just think you know everything.
Okay, does this have anything to do with the, and I don't want to go off on a big tangent, but the Masonic involvement of Washington and, you know, a lot of our founding fathers?
Yes.
But
Not,
is it Masonic? I mean, the Masonic movement, they believe in Christ as some kind of,
well,
or, I don't know.
the Masons, our relationship with the Masonic temples and the Masons is not a healthy one, because the Masonic code rejects papacy, okay? Rejects papism and all that Roman stuff, all right? I'm not certain the code says Catholic. I would have to look that up, but definitely papists.
But they believe that Christ is the Son of God.
I think you're right. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's something I'm going to look up too. Yes. A lot of, and there's all that secrecy involved, okay? And a lot of the founding fathers were kind of tied into that, all right? So I'm kind of contradicting myself by saying, yes, they were Masons who believed in Christ, but they weren't. Most of them were deists, believing in God, okay? Thomas Jefferson for sure, because I studied a lot about him, and I read his writings. He thought Jesus Christ was a wonderful religious figure, just wonderful, okay? One of the greats. One of the greats. He might have. That would have been good. That would have been good. Yeah. All right, let's move this along. Okay, so we have 13 colonies. All right, 11 of them have prohibited the practice of Catholicism, even the presence of Catholicism. Okay, Western Pennsylvania says we're Quakers, we're peace-loving, we don't want to see a lot of Catholics, but we're not going to persecute. Okay, Maryland says, the Calvert says, you know, everybody is okay here, and there were some exclusions on that. But after fighting battles with the Protestants, the Puritans, in 1649, Maryland passes the first act of toleration, okay, which is going to be the foundation for a lot of states' constitutions in that First Amendment, all right? What are the 4 freedoms in the First Amendment? Press. Everybody forgets the 4th one. Assembly. We have a right to protest, to assemble and protest peacefully, okay? But that's our right. That's our First Amendment right. Second Amendment is, everybody knows the Second Amendment. All right. So what about the southernmost British colony? Which is that? Georgia. Okay. You all help me out, okay? Georgia was the last of the colonies to be founded in 1723? 33. That was close. 1733. By whom? James Oglethorpe. His family, okay? Oglethorpe had experienced some persecution, some divisiveness, because he was not a radical Puritan. He was more of an Anglican, okay, in England. And when he came here, he founded the colony of Georgia with the belief that most people should be welcomed in their religious beliefs. For example, I read about this because I don't know a lot about Georgia. But there were more Jews in early colonial Georgia than any other colony, because Oglethorpe allowed Jews and welcomed Jews, okay? And there were a lot of we would call them today the Amish, okay, who were wonderful people, but just a little strange, and especially the German ones who kind of retained that German dialect, okay? But they were welcome in Georgia. So he was very receptive to most groups except Papists. He wanted nothing to do with Papists, and he didn't want them in Georgia, okay? Yeah, we get it all the time. Do you know that Florida had a law until 1903 that Catholics could not own land? Till 1903. Now, most people ignored it. If you had a Catholic buyer, you ignored it. But yeah, that was on the books. My mother-in-law told me that. Until night.
You know that we gave the Protestants a lot of ammunition sometime, or even before.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff that happens in Rome.
That whole, well, 2 weeks ago we talked about the Reformation, you know. So many ways Luther brought up great points. And if there had only been someone in Rome that had kind of sat down with him, I don't know. Whatever. Okay. So Catholicism is banned, all right, until 1755. What happens in 1755, Eddie? I think somebody already said that. Right. There is a big event in Georgia history, okay? The Crown reclaims the colony, takes it away from the Oglethorpes. And that's when you get into now royal governors, okay? And get rid of all the trustees and the representatives of that family. Which is the Crown. The second George, we know George III, okay? But the second George was kind of big on regaining all these lands that his father had given away in the Americas. Once they found out how big the Americas were, okay? All right. And the anti-Catholic ban remained in this country. Now, in this colony, is there something that kind of breaks that anti-Catholicism? There is, but it's not a singular event. When the Revolutionary War breaks out, okay, a number of people from Georgia register to fight, okay, against the British, right, who say, I am Irish Catholic, I am French Catholic, and I am Haitian Catholic, okay? And records indicate that there were about 3,000 soldiers fighting with Washington who were of Catholic descent, okay? And a number of generals recognized that. And when you see that, the mind starts saying, well, how can we say no, but yes, thank you? You see what I'm saying? No, you can't be a citizen, but yeah, come help us out and fight the British. And it starts the mind wondering, okay? So the strong bigotry tends to lessen a bit with the course of the revolution, all right? And then we free ourselves from England, okay? And we get into the establishment of statehood and all of that, and the fighting and so on and so forth, the bickering. You know, our first government was a failure, right? The Articles of Confederation failed. They flopped. Have you ever studied? I don't want to get off on that either, okay? But have you ever studied it? It was an interesting, today we would say, what a joke, okay? But it was a really interesting attempt by very rational people to move from monarchism to democracy. You didn't just jump, you know? So what did you do? You were big on representation, and so the articles would say, we're going to be run by a Congress. Okay? Well, we're going to have a president. Well, we're going to have a president, but he's going to be like the president of the Congress, and he's going to be elected every year. Okay? Congress is going to have all the power, right? Well, what happens when, for example, in western Pennsylvania, the whiskey farmers start rebelling? Or Daniel Shea leads a rebellion against taxes in Massachusetts, okay? Congress can't do anything about it, right? They need to kind of, they go to Virginia. Both colonies went to Virginia and said, can you send some military? Because Virginia was growing. And they send the military up, a young lieutenant, George Washington, okay? And it all falls apart. And so in I'm getting off of the church, but I got to say this. In 1787, especially people like Hamilton and Jefferson and Franklin and Washington call for a meeting to strengthen the Articles. And they meet in Philadelphia, and after about 2 days of argument, they say, let's just start over again. Let's just start over. And that's our great constitutional convention, okay? And if you want to read about wheeling, dealing, oh my gosh, you know, the 3/5 on slavery, oh my gosh, the deals that were cast. That's real democracy, in a way, compromise, okay? And eventually, the Articles are passed, okay? The Constitution was passed in 1788. New York, which was probably the second strongest state, says we are not going to vote for that unless our freedom of speech is guaranteed. And Alexander Hamilton says, all right, we'll attach 12 amendments to the Constitution. 10 of them passed in the First Amendment. Yeah, Bill of Rights, okay? And that gave us our new government. And then they looked around, they said, all right, we don't want a king, but the one-year president isn't going to work. So let's do a 4-year president. And who can we get? George Washington, unanimous, okay? He served 2 terms. So. All right, we're up on our American history. What's the church doing? Well, there's an interesting statistic. Let's see. I think I have it right here. I actually found this when I was doing a paper on Catholic schools, and I found this statistic. Oh gosh, I gotta save it. Where is it? Yes, our Catholic population. Okay. All right, Janet, make sure you get all this. Okay. In 1790, there are approximately 4 million people in the colonies. Now the United States, because we can call them the United States. All right. They conducted a census in 1790. Can you imagine a census back then? Horseback and so on and so forth. I mean, it's hard enough today to get everybody to fill out those forms. All right, so it's estimates. It's estimates, okay? Approximately 4 million Americans, okay? And we're beginning to heal because there were some states, not so much Georgia, but Virginia, there was a very, and the Carolinas, a very strong Anglican pro-British group who were beaten, okay? All right. 35,000 Catholics. So who's the math whiz? Less than 1%. Less than 1%, okay? And as you go through the years and you go through the various censuses, if we jump to the Civil War, okay, in what year is Abraham Lincoln elected president? 1860. Very good. And the war breaks out 61 with the first shots fired where? Fort Sumter. Okay. All right. Very good. All right. I'm sorry? What? On to, yes. Definitely, yes. Yes. Who was the Confederate that ordered it? It wasn't Stonewall Jackson. Who was it? Who?
It was a Citadel cadet.
That ordered the firing?
No, that got skittish and shot.
Oh. Well, who was the general in charge of the forces on Charleston? Beauregard. Wasn't it Beauregard? Okay, we got to check. No, we don't have to check that. That's not important. That won't be on the final exam, okay? Okay. All right. So, 1860. What's our population? 31 million. I mean, this country grows quickly, okay? We were 4 million, 50 years earlier. 31 million, okay? What's the Catholic population? 3.1 million. So now we're up to 10%, okay? And then in the late 19th century come the Irish, Italian, German Catholic, Pole waves of immigrants, Ellis Island, all that, okay? And all these, you know what a WASP is? Yes, all these nervous wasps who were worried about, the hordes, the papal hordes. Oh, you should see some of the literature.
The WASP was the underlying foundation of the country then, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, we will get into the John Carrolls and so on and so forth. I believe, I think there were 2 Catholics who signed the Declaration of Independence. I think. I'm not certain. If somebody finds that out, you're going to have to kind of email me or something. I'll look it up. All right, 1860. The high point of Catholic representation of percentage of was 1920, not today, 1920, because the waves of immigrants who were 80% Catholic was just phenomenal in 1880, 1885, 1890, 1895, 1900, so on and so forth, okay? And so the census in 1920 showed that this country had 106 million people, one of the largest, okay? And 25 million Catholics, 24%, okay? Today, that's dropped to about 22%, okay? The latest Pew study and CARA study, 330 million Americans and about 72 million Catholics. 332 million, 72 million Catholics. But then when you start saying practicing, as in, do you go to Mass at least twice a month? It drops considerably. So, all right, questions on that? We did the colonial, got Georgia up to that point. Now, let's continue with a little bit on Georgia here, okay? I'm, no. The first church in Georgia, who knows it? They just had, it's no longer an active parish, but it's protected by the Georgia Historical Society. And you may have contributed. About 5 years ago, they had a renovation of it. It's just a little wooden building in, where is it? All right. Why can't, 1792. English Catholics from Maryland established a congregation at Locust Grove, which is now Saron, Georgia, which is an hour west of Augusta off of I-20. Have you ever seen it? Please look up the Church of the Purification of the Blessed Virgin. It's a beautiful, I studied all this last week just for you, okay? Because I didn't know this. The first church in Georgia, and it's no longer an active congregation, but the Historical Society and both dioceses, now we have 2 dioceses, helped to restore it. And so it's a pretty little church, okay? Looks more Protestant than Catholic, but it was wood frame, okay? And that was the first church in Georgia.
First Catholic church?
I'm sorry, first Catholic church, yes, of course. It's called the Church of the Purification. 1792. And the group was from Maryland. And believe it or not, they were English Catholics. Okay? Now, it's interesting because the logbooks of the church show as a young couple the Fitzgeralds, whose granddaughter is Margaret Mitchell, who wrote Gone with the Wind. Okay? So her grandparents were part of that founding Catholic group that started the first Catholic church in Georgia. Kind of interesting, huh? Yeah. All right. In the early 1800s, we see French Catholics coming to Savannah, Irish Catholics coming to Augusta. And then in around the 1830s and 40s, you see more and more Irish Catholics from Augusta and Irish Catholics from Boston settling here, around here. And that grew considerably, so that, you know, we have the second largest St. Patrick's Day parade next to New York, okay?
What drew them to Savannah? I've always wondered that. So they did right here, they were already here, and then they moved?
Well, it just starts. It's like, you know, it's like the Italians who you know, one of the brothers, they would, you know, I know this because it's my family. One of the brothers or two of the brothers in a big family, they would raise the money to get the two brothers passage to come to the Americas, settle somewhere, and then they would save up money, and then they would start bringing over other members of the family. It's the same thing here, okay? Those initial Irish Catholics that came here were, I believe, four or five families from Augusta, okay? And then Boston, because that was a heavy, heavy Irish settlement. But in the early days, a lot of discrimination in Boston. It's not the Boston that we knew 50 years ago. Now it's pretty much a strange city. And they would just call friends and so on and so forth. And in a couple of articles, why did people go south? Number one, weather. Escape the brutal. Yeah, sure we do. All our snowbirds, okay? I'm not a snowbird anymore, Eddie. I'm permanent. Weather. Yeah, yeah. Okay, let me finish up a little bit more on Georgia, and then we'll try to get back to, try to get a lot of the 19th century going. What's our time? Oh, we got good time. Walker, you going to kind of watch me? We're going to 7:30.
Okay.
All right. There isn't a real strong presence of Catholicism in Georgia, but it does grow very strong in the Baltimore area, okay? After all, the Calvert family is protecting Catholicism in western Maryland, eastern Maryland, okay? And it does spread out a little bit. So here's an interesting fact, okay? One of the reasons settlements, a lot in Georgia, a lot in Florida, okay, a lot in the Carolinas, Catholic settlements did not last. Why do you think? We are a church of sacramental grace, which Martin Luther rejected, okay? What do we need to have the sacraments? Priests, okay? Which Protestants reject, okay? You don't need a priest to get saved. We don't need a priest to get saved. We need a priest to help us with the grace, okay? All right? Unless you want to do it all on your own, okay? There were no priests. That's why most of these settlements did not firmly take root. And it's interesting, the little church up at Locust Grove they were mostly English, but they had a French priest that came down, like once a month, to say Mass and baptize and Mary and so on and so forth. So the congregation had roots, and they built the church, and they had the sacraments, okay? Now it starts to grow. But in many areas of the South, that's not the case, because you just don't have priests, all right? Except Maryland. Maryland attracted two groups of priests, French Jesuits, okay, and German, some Benedictines, okay, some Dominicans, and some of what we'd call diocesan priests, okay, who came to Maryland. And this is what's interesting. The Catholic population in Maryland grew and grew and grew to where at one point, okay, they estimated at the time of the American Revolution, there may have been 10,000 Catholics in Maryland. You know, wow, 10,000, okay? That's a lot for those days. And there were 25 priests. The priests, I mean, it was, a number of the priests were the so-called horseback priests. They spent most of their lives on horseback, going to the outer. But, you know, once a month or so, there was some exchange of ideas and exchange and support. And, you know, eventually somebody started saying, you know, Catholicism, unlike some of our Puritan friends, we're a centralized church. When is the Vatican going to recognize that? Okay? And so starting in 1780s, a group of priests in Maryland started writing to this Cardinal Antonelli in Rome, saying, we need some recognition as a growing Catholic community, and one of the best ways to do that would be to have a bishop. But if you appoint a bishop, we're going to catch hell from all of our Puritan and Anglican neighbors, okay? We've got to have some say in that, right? So the letters go back and forth, and who is one of the brightest minds of that group? John Carroll, okay? 2 R's, 2 L's. He's really brilliant. He should have met up with Jefferson. I don't think they ever did, because Carroll's a little bit later. Carroll would have been very young for Thomas Jefferson. So John Carroll is one who is kind of leading this group, helping to forge this group, okay? And it goes back and forth, and finally, in 1793, Antonelli says, at first he says, oh, no. We'll appoint a bishop when we get around to it, okay? We have other problems. What's going on? Well, the French Revolution, okay, killing all the priests and so on and so forth, and the uprisings in Naples. You know, we got our problems over here. So he says to this group, when we get around to it, we will appoint a bishop. And John Carroll kept saying, this is different. This is not Italy. This is not France, okay? If you appoint and send over a bishop, it's going to be rough. It's really going to be rough. So let us, and of course Antonelli said, no, that's not how it's done, okay? Guess what? They compromised. No, they did. Somebody worked out a compromise. And what the Vatican, what they said, all right, fine. Give us 3 names, we'll pick one. How's that? Because then the Americans could say, hey, that's our bishop, okay? And the Vatican could say, hey, we appointed so-and-so. Guess who got appointed? John Carroll, okay? First bishop. That'll be on the final exam, okay? 1795, the first Catholic bishop in the United States, 1795, okay? With a bishop comes what? A geographic region called a diocese. And so Baltimore, very first diocese in this country, right? English. Spanish had their diocese, okay? And some of them touched southern Georgia and southern Texas and southern California, okay?
So is that where the Baltimore Catechism was?
Oh, Baltimore was dominant for 50 years, yes. 3 big councils of the American bishops were held in Baltimore. Because as we get going here, or if Walker doesn't cut me off, you know, time, all right? If we get going here, we'll see that one of the big battles in the 1880s and 1870s, 80s, and 90s in Catholicism was whether or not to have a school. And you had those bishops who said, well, you know, we've got these wonderful public schools, let's work with them, and so on and so forth. And then a lot of the Irish, no way. All right, we had one bishop who said, we build a school first, and then we'll build a church. Why? Schooling is education. Schooling is the kids, okay? And that was one of the big fights. And they eventually compromised over the question of schools. Fascinating, isn't it? It's just fascinating. Okay, and we're not even halfway through. All right. So, how's Georgia impacted? Well, Georgia is impacted in this sense, that now there's organization, Maryland is what, about 400 miles? Okay, we're getting closer and closer, and now we have a bishop up here. And John Carroll is remarkable. He just works like, 22 hours a day. And he sets up these traveling priests, okay? And he realizes that he is eventually going to have to recruit American priests. They can't all be foreigners, okay? And so I had the guy's name. Where is it? First American who was ordained. I had his name and I forgot. All right, that won't be on the exam. If I can't remember it, I won't put it on the exam. but Carroll recruits, and he has the guy sent back to England because he has to be ordained, okay? And that's the first American that is ordained a priest, right? And then Carroll will start ordaining a few more. And there are a few that are sent to places like Augusta and Savannah. Now, I'm compacting about 40 years, okay? I mean, putting it all together, all right? But the church does grow pretty quickly, okay? And in 1810, 3 more dioceses are going to be added. Baltimore is going to become what's known as the Archdiocese, okay? And then there's going to be a diocese in Philadelphia, a diocese in New York, and a diocese in what is now Louisville, Kentucky, okay? Oh, yeah. Louisville's a very, very Catholic town, very Catholic. German Catholic. Ooh. Yeah, there are pockets. I know it's strange, but Cincinnati. Well, in the 19th century, we'll get into the power of the German Catholic triangle. You ever heard of that? 3 real powerful cardinals and their fight for schools and their fight against the public system. What are the 3 great beer-producing cities of the Midwest? Cincinnati, Milwaukee, St. Louis, Pabst, St. Louis, okay? And all those Germans, okay? Yeah. All right, to move on and close out Georgia, okay? In 1820, the growth was strong enough in the southern inland areas that the Vatican established the Diocese of Charleston, 1820. That's the first truly southern diocese. I mean, Baltimore is kind of mid-Atlantic, all right? And guess how large the land was. North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, North Florida, and parts of Alabama. That was the Diocese of Charleston. Big. In 1850, to finalize this chapter, the Vatican establishes the Diocese of Savannah. Okay? Church is growing. And Savannah controls how much land? All of Georgia, parts of Florida, and parts of South Carolina. Just a little, the Vatican's map didn't necessarily correspond with the states. Okay? That was 1850. So our diocese was born in 1850. And it governed all of Georgia until 1956. 1956, when Atlanta broke off, okay? And Atlanta was growing so fast after the World War II that it very quickly became an archdiocese, overwhelming Savannah's population, 1956, okay? When was the cathedral built? Took 3 years.
No, I was asking if the boundaries of the diocese, does it transcend state lines? Or
Yeah.
does it stay within? So
It can. Yeah.
does Savannah still cut into South Carolina a little bit? Or,
No. No, because Augusta is Savannah. Athens is Atlanta. Yeah.
So the diocese of Savannah is all within Georgia, the state lines of Georgia.
I'm pretty sure. Eddie, Janet? I'm pretty sure. The Vatican has come around to recognizing, how every country's different. And they find our state system a little different. The overlap in Italy, for example, is incredible. Right here, if you go up north where my father's family's from, right here in this southern part of the region of Trento, it's Italian. And you go about 20 miles and they speak German because it's Austrian. Okay? Yeah. And if you're Swiss, you speak Italian, German, and French because there's no Swiss. Okay? So, anyway. All right. This will be on the exam. When was the cathedral built? Started in 1873. And whereas, like the Cathedral of Orvieto took almost 300 years to build, in modern times with somewhat modern equipment, it was built in 3 years. 1873, consecrated in 1876, and the fire of 1888 wiped it out and rebuilt. And we have one of the prettiest cathedrals in the country. Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, I read that this is the #1 tourist site in Georgia, is the cathedral at Savannah. Yeah, so we beat the aquarium. I'm sorry?
We read it's number 10 in the country.
It's what?
Number 10 in the country.
Of a tourist site?
Yeah, we read on it.
Like Disneyland and stuff like that? Wow. That's pretty cool. It is a beautiful cathedral. Beautiful cathedral. Okay, any questions on Georgia? And how much time do I have?
We're down to 23 minutes.
All right. Let's go into some of the wonderful history, our wonderful history of the 19th century, the 1800s, okay? So, what are some of the high points of this? All right, I need to correct. I knew I should have looked at this, okay? The 4 dioceses that are added in 1808. I said 1810, okay? And they are Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Bardstown, Kentucky, which is Louisville. It's a suburb of Louisville, all right? We see in the early part of the 19th century a lot of Catholic immigrants coming out of mainly Germany and Ireland. Now, it's not the famine yet. It's not that huge wave of immigrants. And it's not the wars in Germany, the unification wars, okay? And it's not the unification wars in Italy, all right? So we get to the point where we're starting to see the growth of the church in the diocese. In 1820, we have the Diocese of Charleston established. And the first bishop of Charleston, another powerful name, do you know, Walker? John England. How'd you know that?
It's just one of the few things that stuck after 50 years.
John England, Bishop John England.
England was a high school in Charleston.
Yeah, big football powerhouse they used to be. If you want some interesting reading that is not necessarily spiritual, okay, because the history of the church can help you with your spirituality, but it's not necessarily spiritual, but it's interesting. Read about John Carroll. You can even just go online and, go to the Catholic Encyclopedia, okay, which is online, and read about John England. I mean, these people were just, talk about workaholics. Oh my gosh. The church was blessed. I mean, we've screwed up a lot, okay? Alexander the Sixth and all that group. But we've really been blessed in some of these early foundations. And John England was probably the Catholic spokesman in the United States for a decade, maybe 2 decades, 1820, 30, 40, okay? And naturally speaking, okay, you've got a young institution, a vibrant institution growing, and you're going to have growing pains, okay? And one of the earliest battles in American Catholicism, okay, and Janet, I think you kind of alluded to it, was over the question of how much power lay owners should have. Because so many of the churches began by using trustees who owned the land and owned the church, okay? A little different than Europe. And the Vatican was always nervous about that, okay? And so many of these early churches, okay, have trustees. What's wrong with that? Well, it makes the Vatican nervous, okay? But it also gets you into this kind of conflict that you know, if I own this building, I have power over what goes on in it. See? And if I don't like you preaching about, you know, welcoming immigrants or not welcoming immigrants, I can kind of stop you. There's that tension, okay? And boy, it was tense. And John England was one who kind of, he was trying to steer the church. I mean, you know, he once told a group of people, look, we're not going to break from Rome. Others have tried that, okay? Come on, we're Catholics, okay? So we got to work this out. Well, eventually what happens is that in 1822, he produces the so-called Charleston Constitution of how a Catholic church should operate. And it outlines the relationships of the bishops and the priests and laymen. And it basically talks about respect and due rights of ownership, but that the bishop and therefore the pastor is the final say, certainly in theological matters. Now, you got into arguments that weren't theological, like, should we spend $100,000 building a school? That's different, okay? That's not theological, that's financial. And I say 100,000, today it would be 2 million, okay? Do we spend 2 million building a school? Okay. Strong views on both parts. Okay. But as far as actually preaching the gospel, the pastor, backed by the bishop, backed by the Vatican, had the final say. And eventually, and I don't know how, but eventually this idea of ownership just kind of dies out. There are no trustee churches in 1850. And Catholic, right. My Methodist friends bought their church. Yeah. You know, the group that voted to leave the United Methodist congregation? They bought the church, so they're independent. Yeah. They're looking around for an organization to join. Oh, okay. We're really close friends, and we laugh over this thing. And I'm listening to this, and I said to her, because Becky was doing a lot of the talking, I said, I'm a lifelong Catholic. Do you have any idea how weird this all sounds to me? And they all laughed, okay? You know, because, oh, we broke away, and now we're independent, and we're buying the church, and we're looking around for another group to join. Whoa. That's cool. Okay. In 1821, John England publishes the first catechism. What's a catechism? It's a statement of basic beliefs, doctrines, prayers, and how to worship. That's a catechism, okay? And it was a little thing, I think it was 16 pages. It was the first Baltimore Catechism. Do any of you own our current catechism? It's 1,176 pages. Talk about legalism, huh? Jeez. But I should say this. If you don't own a catechism, and you're at the point where you just want to read more about your faith, buy one. Go on eBay or Amazon, and buy, paperback copies are pretty cheap, okay? And it's arranged, it's beautifully arranged. Read the table of contents. It's really arranged very rationally how the faith is presented. And when you use the index, always remember one thing. The number reference is not to a page, but to a paragraph. Strange, okay? I always have to tell myself, oh, I got to go to this paragraph to find out this thing, okay? So if you want to read, for example, what does the church teach on abortion? You go to A, it says abortion, and you see these numbers, those are paragraphs. And you go to the paragraphs, and then there are all the documents, okay? Oh, yeah. We don't sit around and vote, for better or worse. Almost every subject you can think of, you'll find in the catechism. Now, some really, really current ones, like global warming or something like that, probably not, because the Vatican hasn't written a lot about that, but eventually will. Yeah, and where it comes from. And you know what happens, Chris? I should ask you, when you read, let's see, purgatory, what bothered me? Infant and original sin. And I'm just saying, it just kind of bothers me how these beautiful little babies can have original sin. And it took me a while to figure out it's not an event. They didn't do anything. It's human nature. And then I want to know, God, why did you do that? Because somehow God defined human nature as free will, or vice versa. Free will is human nature, okay? And so we're living with this, we always have an inclination to do bad things, make bad choices. The Catechism helped me with that. And I was reading some of these beautiful documents. It's all documented. Our Catechism is about this much print and this much tiny footnotes. Because it says where in the Bible you can find a reference, what papal document, what council document, what part of St. Thomas Aquinas' writing or St. Catherine's writing or something like that. So if you want to bone up on your faith, get it. I know people tend to put it down, but it's a big book. It's a reference book. So, you have one? Yeah. Okay. Let me move on, okay? In 1821, John Quincy Adams, in an address, called the Catholic Church in America an enemy of democracy. He was very typical WASP, okay? And he's seen more and more immigrants coming, and he's seen a lot of foreign priests and bishops, and he's wondering, who are they going to follow? For example, if we go to war with Italy, who are they going to follow? All right? I'm not trying to defend bigotry, but there is that kind of fear of papists. All right? All right. John England writes him a letter. And the letter is so well written about loyalty and so on and so forth that England says, and I hope, Mr. President, that some future date we might be able to pursue this. Okay, so you aren't such a jackass bigot. No, I didn't say that, all right? But that's kind of the tone, all right? And 3 years later, Adams calls England and meets him, and is so impressed with him that on the inaugural, the State of the Union address in 1826, January 8th, okay, President John Quincy Adams has Bishop John England address Congress. Wow. Yeah. Cycles turn, okay? Not permanently. We had some really anti-Catholic, they weren't, Woodrow Wilson was not comfortable with Catholics, okay?
Well, even look at Kennedy. People were freaking out
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
the first Catholic president, because they were worried that, oh, he's going to be
Yeah.
answering to the Pope,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
That was just, what, 1960?
1960. And I'll tell you, some of the Baptist publications around the South, whoa, they flipped out with Kennedy. Whoa. Okay. Bishop John England addresses Congress January 8th for 2 hours. And within that speech, he says several quotes that I took, okay? Catholics are loyal Americans, we assure you. We love this country. Rome cannot interfere in any ballot, but Congress cannot interfere in religious matters. I remind you, we have a First Amendment. I mean, he's pretty cool, okay? Christians must overcome our differences and stop behaving like we hate each other. Very, very eloquent, very powerful. And if you look at him, he's a good-looking guy, too. I mean, he's really a wonderful presence, all right? John England. 1829, First Council of Baltimore, first of the councils. There are 7 bishops present. There is a papal nuncio. 3 bishops are absent, the 3 Western bishops out in St. Louis and that. It's a long way, okay? What's a papal nuncio? Very good. Every country has a papal nuncio, except some countries that are really strong Catholic, all right? We have a papal nuncio. He lives in Washington, okay? And he kind of represents the Pope. And so when now the cardinals meet, or the bishops meet, the papal nuncio is always there. And he is, his name is, I believe he is, I should know this because I know, because one of my classmates was his secretary. Cardinal, I can't remember who the papal nuncio is, okay? But he would be the one that kind of keeps an eye on things for the Vatican, all right? And if he's doing his job well, he kind of tells the Vatican too, you know, how you deal with the uniqueness of this area, okay? Because I can remember a famous story when John Paul was a young pope, which would have been when? 19, when was Paul? 71? 72? All right. And he was meeting with all the bishops from around the world because he wanted to kind of broaden his view. And the first Americans that came in, it was a bishop from, was it Georgia or Florida? I am from the southern United States. And he asked, oh, a map. He had him lay out a map. He said, show me the Bible Belt. Where is the Bible Belt? Okay. First Council of Baltimore. The big discussion was over trusteeship, okay? And as I said, that kind of just fizzled out. We never had big roaring fights over it, okay? In 1829, there are 11 dioceses, okay? Over the next 20 years, there will be 31 more, all right? The 1830s, because of the great number of immigrants coming in, sees a new wave of anti-Catholicism. Some press are terrible. The Papist Peril, barbarian invasions, and then, you know, all these nuns coming over, okay? So that brought on a new wave of anti-Catholicism. If you want to read about really nasty, nasty stuff. Maria Monk was one of the worst bigots, writing all these awful things about what goes on in convents and in seminaries and in parish halls. In 1834, a Protestant mob broke into and searched several convents because the rumors were that the nuns were kidnapping little Protestant girls. Okay, and one of the convents was burned. No arrests. Okay, in 1844, anti-Catholic rioting in Philadelphia burned 8 Catholic churches. 13 were killed. Okay, 1844. A reaction to that, the New York bishop bought guns and brought in his parishioners and armed them to protect the Cathedral of New York, okay, from anti-Catholic mobs, all right? And the biggest, in 1850s, a new party emerges in this country, the Know-Nothings. And among other things, they were violently anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic. It was a political party, okay, openly so. Now, they died out, okay? See, what happened in this country was Washington's conservative party, the Federalists, eventually died out. And for about 30 years, we only had one political party. Jefferson's Democrats, okay? And different parties tried to emerge to keep a, balance there. And the Know-Nothings were one, okay? 4 minutes. That didn't happen, but in 1856 in Wisconsin, a group of people got together as an abolitionist party and named themselves Party of the Republicans, okay? And then in 1856, in 1858, they elected a young lawyer by the name of Abraham Lincoln. In 1860, president. That grew pretty quickly, the Republican Party. Know-Nothings, growth of schools, okay? Bishop John Hughes of New York was one of the great anti-public school people, okay? There was the infamous Lucas affair in New York, where a young man by the name of Richard Lucas, I believe that was right, refused to read the King James Bible in school. He said, no, I'm not going to read that. And he was beaten. His hands were beaten, okay? And so Bishop Hughes brought suit and sued a lot of people. Some nasty stuff, really nasty stuff, okay? All right. Church leaders, I should have left more time on this. We don't have too many Catholic leaders who are forcefully, actively speaking out against slavery. Okay? And we do have some who condone it. Now, just Google, and be careful you don't get a really anti-Catholic page. But if you go to the Catholic Encyclopedia, it's got a pretty fair treatment on Catholic leadership and slavery. Okay? Especially some of the southern bishops. They were very, very quiet on slavery. The Bishop of Charleston in 1861 called on his people to support the Confederacy. Not necessarily slavery, but South Carolina, North Carolina, okay? And you see that, and you don't see, and even in the North, you don't see a real strong abolitionist sentiment amongst Catholics. And it's kind of, I don't want to get anybody upset, but Irish culture is uncomfortable with non-whites. Why? You ever been to Ireland? It's all white, okay? You ever have your DNA done by Ancestry.com? Mine is like 85% Italian, but all these other areas. Sister Pauline O'Brien is 99.9% Ireland, because it's an island, okay? And she explains it. She says, my beloved mother and that. They're very, very, they don't know what to do around black people, brown people.
Well, that's just the reverse too. A white person going to Africa or
Yeah, yeah.
It's just sort of.
Oh, I'm not, right.
Yeah, it's just what you're used to, and
Chris, the only reason I brought this up is because some people will say, well, why wasn't the church adamantly abolitionist? You don't understand culture and how culture ties into all of this, okay? And I'm not condemning it. I'm not condoning it. I'm trying to explain it so that you don't have kind of to you, I don't want you to become a bigot, anti-Catholic bigot, okay? Well, the church didn't blah, 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 blah. I've had these arguments with relatives. Right.
I think that was our explanation why we didn't get involved.
Oh, I would agree. I would agree. But on the other hand, you do have one or two Catholic bishops, and the Catholic bishop in Detroit, or is it Cincinnati, is raising moral issues about owning people. Okay? Not political, just some of that. But it's not loud. I mean, it's not a huge overcoming, okay? Anyway, we got up to the Civil War. There's so much more. I think you have an idea that it's a fascinating, I mean, our history is just fascinating. You go into these battles over the Catholic schools. You go into these battles over modernism, okay? Whether or not we can accept Charles Darwin, okay? And actually, the Catholic Church weathers that Darwinism a little easier than Protestants because we're not 100% dependent on the Bible, okay? So when Charles Darwin, not Darwin himself, but when Darwinists start proving some of these math things in the Bible, can't possibly be, that the earth was 4,000 years old. It can't possibly, that's just, that's no way. The Protestants are shook. Yeah. Our side of the family. Yeah. Our side of the family. Yay. All right. See you guys. I don't know. I'll find out who the new pastor is going to be and say if you'd like to have some classes or something like that. Yeah. And if he does, fine. And as I was saying, maybe he might want to teach something. Whatever. Oh, sure. Let me see if I've got one that I can tell. Let's see here.
Being recorded.
Okay, well, this is a cute one. That voice. No, keep it on. This is a cute one, okay? This is a spouse joke. This is a spouse joke. It was, Delia. It's sort of like, whoa. It's like that candle that blew up at Mass. Whoa. This is a cute spouse joke, okay? So I always use Fred and Ethel, okay? Fred and Ethel had gone out. They've been married for like 46 years, and they went out for a party. And Fred tends to have a drink or two, and he gets kind of mouthy and so on and so forth. And, Ethel's put up with this for 46 years, and she knows, and blah, blah, blah. And so the party's over, and they come home, okay? And Ethel immediately goes out to her little sitting room with a little patio and opens up her little hutch and takes out the Chardonnay, right? And pours a big glass of Chardonnay, starts sipping on it. Fred comes in. Ethel says, "Oh, my love, you've gotten me through all these tough times, these tough years." And Fred says, "Aw, is that the wine talking?" And Ethel says, No, I'm talking to the wine. That's cute. That's cute. That's cute.
Thank you.
See you.
Appreciate it.
Bye, guys.